The ship carrying humanity's first ambassador dropped out of hyperspace above Prime. Captain stood at the viewport and watched the planet grow larger. She had seen many beautiful things in her 52 years of life, but nothing like this. The world below glowed with soft blue light. Massive crystal towers rose from its surface, reaching so high that their tops disappeared into the clouds. Ships of every shape and size moved around the planet like fireflies dancing in the night. This was the heart of galactic civilization. This was where 847 different species came together to govern the stars. Took a deep breath and straightened her uniform. Earth had sent her here with one mission. She was to ask the Galactic Conclave for membership. Humanity wanted to join the community of spacefaring peoples. They wanted to trade, to learn, and to grow alongside their new neighbors. She had no idea how badly this day would go. The shuttle carried her down through the atmosphere and landed on a platform made of white stone. Alien guards waited for her there. They were tall and thin, with 4 arms and skin the color of copper. They said nothing as they led her through hallways that seemed to go on forever. Tried not to stare at everything she passed. There were beings made of living light floating through the air. There were creatures with dozens of eyes watching her from shadowy corners. There were things she could not even describe, things that hurt her brain to look at directly. Finally, they reached the great chamber. The room was enormous. It could have held 100 football stadiums and still had space left over. Thousands of platforms floated in the air, each one holding delegates from different worlds. At the center of it all sat the High Council, the 12 most powerful beings in the galaxy. And at the very top, contained within a shell of living crystal, floated High Arbiter. He was ancient beyond measure, a being of glowing gas that had watched empires rise and fall for 10,000 years. His voice echoed through the chamber like thunder. The creature from Sol System may speak. Stepped onto the speaking platform. It lifted her into the air until she floated before the gathered delegates. She could feel millions of eyes watching her. Honored members of the conclave, she began. I am Captain, representing the United Terran Federation. Humanity comes before you today with open hands and hopeful hearts. We ask only for the chance to join your great civilization. Whispers rippled through the chamber. Heard words she did not understand, but the tone was clear. They were not happy whispers. A delegate from a nearby platform leaned forward. It looked like a giant insect with wings of rainbow glass. High Arbiter, surely we are not actually considering this request. Do the council members know what world this creature comes from? Its crystal shell pulsed with light. We are aware. Sol 3, known to its inhabitants as Earth, a Category 7. The chamber erupted in sounds of shock and fear. Stood very still, her face calm even though her heart was beating fast. Those who are not familiar, continued. A Category 7 world is one of the most hostile environments capable of producing intelligent life. Sol 3 has a gravity pull nearly twice the galactic average. Its atmosphere contains a highly reactive gas called oxygen that would kill most species within minutes. Its temperature varies by over 100 degrees depending on location and season. And its ecosystem is dominated by predators that hunt and kill each other constantly. He paused, and his next words dripped with disgust. The fact that anything intelligent evolved there at all is a miracle. The fact that these humans survived long enough to reach space is frankly terrifying. Felt anger building in her chest, but she pushed it down. She had been warned that this might happen. Earth scientists had explained that most spacefaring species came from gentle worlds, places where life was easy and violence was rare. They had never met anything like humanity before. High Arbiter, she said, keeping her voice steady, I understand your concerns, but we are not the monsters you seem to think we are. Yes, our world is harsh. Yes, we evolved as predators, but we have also learned compassion. We have art and music and love. We build hospitals and schools. We dream of peace. A sound came from the council that might have been laughter. Peace, repeated. Your species has been in space for less than 200 years, and in that time you have fought 3 wars among yourselves. You detonated nuclear weapons on your own planet. You hunted hundreds of your fellow Earth species to extinction, and you expect us to believe you want peace. Opened her mouth to respond, but another delegate cut her off. I have reviewed the biological data on these humans, it said. The speaker was a blob of purple flesh covered in small mouths. They are persistence predators. Do you know what that means? They do not chase their prey quickly and kill it cleanly. They follow it for hours, sometimes days, never stopping, never resting, until the prey simply collapses from exhaustion. Then they eat it. More sounds of horror from the chamber. They also produce a substance called adrenaline, the blob continued. When threatened or excited, their bodies flood with this chemical. It increases their strength, their speed, their tolerance for pain. It allows them to perform acts that would kill most other species. They become, quite literally, more dangerous when they are afraid. And perhaps most disturbing of all, another delegate added, they form emotional bonds with other predators. They keep creatures called dogs and cats in their homes, creatures with fangs and claws, and they call these things their friends. Could not help herself. They are our friends. They have been our companions for thousands of years. They love us and we love them. The chamber fell silent. The delegates stared at her as if she had just admitted to something horrible. High Arbiter spoke again, and his voice was cold. The Council has heard enough. We will now vote on the human petition for membership. The vote took less than 30 seconds. Every single delegate voted no. The petition is announced. Furthermore, the Council hereby restricts the human species to their home system. They are forbidden from expanding beyond the boundaries of Sol. Any attempt to colonize other stars will be met with immediate military response. Felt like she had been punched in the stomach. You cannot do this. We have done nothing wrong. We came here in peace. You came here as replied. Your very existence is a threat to civilized life. The Council's decision is final. You will return to your little planet and stay there. Perhaps in 10,000 years, if your species has not destroyed itself, we will reconsider. Guards appeared beside and gripped her arms. She was lifted off the platform and carried toward the exit. This is a mistake, she called out. You do not know what you are doing. Someday you will need us and you will remember this moment. Crystal's shell flickered with amusement. We have governed this galaxy for 12,000 years, human. We have seen species like yours before. You will burn out eventually, consumed by your own violence. Until then, you will be contained. Was taken back to her ship. She sat in silence as it carried her away from Prime, away from the crystal towers and the floating platforms, away from the beings who had looked at her like she was a monster. When she finally reached Earth and delivered the Council's verdict, the leaders of humanity listened carefully. They asked questions, they discussed options, and then they made a decision. They would accept the Council's ruling. They would stay in their solar system. They would not fight back. But they asked for one thing in return. They wanted to be left alone. The Council agreed without hesitation. They believed the matter was settled forever. They were very, very wrong. 300 years passed. Humanity did exactly what they promised. They stayed in their solar system. They did not try to expand to other stars. They did not send ships into conclave space. They simply disappeared from galactic awareness, like a small stone sinking into a deep ocean. The Council forgot about them almost immediately. There were more important matters to discuss: trade agreements between empires, border disputes between species, the endless politics of governing 847 different civilizations across millions of star systems. Sometimes, younger delegates would ask about the older ones would laugh and tell them not to worry. The humans were probably extinct by now, they said. Species from worlds like that never lasted long. They always destroyed themselves eventually. But humanity was not extinct. Humanity was busy. Inside their little prison of a solar system, the human race had transformed itself. They spread across every rock and moon they could find. They built cities on Mars and floating stations in the clouds of Venus. They hollowed out asteroids and turned them into homes for millions of people. They constructed massive habitats around Jupiter and Saturn, places where children grew up looking at rings of ice instead of blue skis. And they watched the stars. Human scientists built telescopes so powerful they could count the craters on moons in distant galaxies. They created sensors that could detect the smallest ripple in the fabric of space. They studied the universe with the patience of predators waiting for prey. They knew they were not alone. They knew the council was out there watching them, ready to destroy them if they stepped out of line. So they waited, they prepared, and they kept their eyes open. On the frozen moon of Titan, a young scientist named Doctor was working the night shift at Deep Space Observatory 7. His job was boring most of the time. He stared at screens showing empty space and wrote reports that nobody read. But tonight was different. An alarm beeped on his console, looked at the data and frowned. There was an anomaly at the edge of sensor range, far beyond the borders of conclave space. Something was creating gravitational distortions that should have been impossible. He ran the numbers 3 times to make sure he was not making a mistake. Then he ran them 3 more times because he could not believe what he was seeing. The anomaly was growing. Sent a message to his supervisor. His supervisor sent a message to the regional director. The regional director sent a message to the Terran High Command. Within 6 hours, every leader on Earth knew about the anomaly. Within 12 hours, they had sent probes to investigate. The probes took 2 years to reach their destination. When the data finally came back, was there to receive it. He was older now, with gray in his hair and lines on his face, but he still worked at Deep Space Observatory 7. He had spent every day since his discovery wondering what was out there. Now he knew. The images showed ships, billions of ships. They were not made of metal like human vessels or crystal like conclave craft. They were alive, massive creatures of flesh and bone and chitin, drifting through the void between galaxies. Each one was the size of a small moon, and there were so many of them that they blocked out the stars. The swarm had found this galaxy. Read the probe's analysis with growing horror. The swarm was ancient, older than most stars. It traveled from galaxy to galaxy, consuming everything in its path. Planets, moons, asteroids, even entire suns. Nothing was left behind but empty space. The creatures did not think as individuals. They shared a single mind, a vast consciousness that stretched across all of them at once. They did not negotiate or communicate. They simply ate. And they were heading straight for conclave space. Calculated their speed and trajectory. At their current pace, the swarm would reach the outer territories in 18 years. The core worlds would fall within 25. The entire galaxy would be stripped bare within 50. The probe had included one more piece of data, a recording of the sounds the swarm made as it moved through space. Listened to it once. He never listened to it again. The screaming stayed in his nightmares for the rest of his life. Admiral was the highest-ranking officer in the Terran Defense Force. He was 73 years old, with a face like weathered stone and eyes that had seen things most humans could not imagine. He had fought in 2 civil wars before humanity had finally united. He had lost friends and family to violence. He understood better than most what darkness lived in the human heart. But even he was shaken by what showed him. "How certain are we?" he asked. 99.7% replied. "The math is solid, the swarm is real, it is coming, and there is nothing that can stop it." Stared at the images for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "The conclave needs to know about this." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what he was suggesting. The Council had rejected humanity 300 years ago. They had called humans monsters. They had locked them in their solar system and thrown away the key. And now wanted to warn them. "Sir," one of his officers said carefully, "the Council made their feelings about us very clear. Why should we help them?" Turned to look at the officer. His eyes were hard, but his voice was gentle. "Because if we do not, everyone dies. The swarm will not stop at conclave space. Eventually, it will come here too. We can fight alone and lose, or we can try to make allies and maybe survive." He paused. "And because it is the right thing to do, we are not the monsters they think we are. Let us prove it." The Terran Council met for 3 days. The debate was fierce. Many wanted to let the conclave burn. They remembered the humiliation their ancestors had suffered. They remembered being called dangerous. They remembered being told they would destroy themselves. But in the end, the vote was unanimous. Humanity would send a warning. Ambassador was chosen for the mission. She was the granddaughter of the woman who had first spoken to the Council 300 years before. She had her grandmother's calm eyes and steady voice. She also had her grandmother's stubborn refusal to give up. Traveled to Prime with a full data package showing everything humanity knew about the swarm. She brought projections and analysis and recommendations. She brought the screaming recording that still haunted dreams. High Arbiter received her in the same chamber where had been rejected so long ago. He looked exactly the same, a cloud of glowing gas in a crystal shell. Time meant nothing to a being like him. "The returns," he said, and his voice dripped with contempt. "What do you want?" Presented her evidence. She showed the images and played the recordings. She explained the timeline and the threat level. She begged the Council to prepare. When she finished, was silent for a moment. Then he made a sound that might have been laughter. "Fear," he said. "Your primitive species invents monsters to justify your own violent nature. There is no swarm. There is no threat. You have fabricated this entire fantasy to trick us into releasing you from your containment." Felt cold anger building in her chest. "High Arbiter, I have brought you proof. The data is right there. Look at it." "I have no interest in lies," replied. "The Conclave has existed for 12,000 years. We have faced many challenges. We will continue to exist long after your species has destroyed itself." He waved one crystalline appendage. "Remove this creature from the chamber, and send a message to the human. If they attempt to leave their system for any reason, we will destroy them." Guards approached. She did not resist as they took her arms, but she stopped at the door and turned back to face the ancient being who had just condemned the galaxy. "When the swarm comes," she said quietly, "we will remember this day. We will remember that we tried to help. We will remember that you refused to listen." She let the guards lead her away. Behind her had already forgotten she existed. He turned his attention to more important matters. A trade dispute between 2 minor species. A border conflict that needed resolution. The warning from the meant nothing to him. It would mean everything very soon. The swarm arrived 2 years earlier than humanity had predicted. They came out of the darkness between galaxies like a wave of living death. The first world to fall was a small colony on the edge of conclave space. It was called Minor, home to 3 million peaceful beings who had never known war. They knew it now. The swarm did not send warnings. They did not make demands. They simply descended from the sky in numbers too large to count. The colonists watched in horror as the horizon filled with shapes that blocked out the sun, creatures of chitin and teeth and hunger. The distress signal lasted for 4 minutes before going silent. By the time conclave ships arrived to investigate, there was nothing left. The planet had been stripped bare. Cities, forests, oceans, everything was gone. Even the atmosphere had been consumed. What remained was a ball of dead rock floating in empty space. High Arbiter received the news in the great chamber. For the first time in 10,000 years, his crystal shell flickered with something that might have been fear. "This is impossible," he whispered. "Nothing could do this, nothing." But the reports kept coming. Another world had fallen, then another, then 10 more. The swarm moved faster than anyone had believed possible. They adapted to every weapon used against them. They learned and changed and grew stronger with each victory. The hegemony had been one of the greatest empires in the galaxy. 700 worlds, 20 billion citizens, a fleet of warships that had never known defeat. They were proud and powerful and absolutely certain of their place in the universe. They fell in 6 months. The Council watched as world after world went dark. They sent fleets to fight the swarm and received nothing back but silence. They built new weapons and developed new strategies, and none of it mattered. They simply ate everything in their path. Refugee ships began flooding into the core worlds. Millions of beings who had lost everything, carrying nothing but their lives and their stories of horror. They spoke of skies turning black with swarm creatures. They spoke of cities dissolving into organic paste. They spoke of friends and family being consumed while still alive. And they spoke of the screaming, the constant, terrible screaming that the swarm made as it fed. Called emergency session after emergency session, he demanded solutions from his scientists and generals and advisors. They gave him nothing but fear and excuses. "The swarm adapts too quickly," one scientist explained. "We develop a weapon and within days they have evolved immunity to it. We find a weakness and within hours they have corrected it. They are not simply winning, they are learning." "Then develop weapons faster," commanded. "Build more ships, train more soldiers." "We have no soldiers," a general replied quietly. "The Conclave has not fought a real war in 8,000 years. Our ships are designed for patrol duties and diplomatic missions. Our people have forgotten how to fight." The High Arbiter's crystal shell pulsed with angry light. "Then we will remember. Surely there are species in the Conclave who still know combat." The general shook his head. There were. Most of them lived in the outer territories. The swarm consumed them first. Silence fell over the chamber. For the first time in 12,000 years, the Galactic Conclave had no answer. They were watching their civilization die, and there was nothing they could do about it. Nothing except one thing. It was a junior delegate who finally said it out loud. She was young, barely a century old, from a species that looked like floating jellyfish. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "What about the—" The chamber erupted in noise. Shouts of anger and denial filled the air. How dare she suggest such a thing? The humans were primitives. The humans were monsters. The humans were worse than the swarm itself. But raised one crystalline appendage, and silence returned. "Continue," he said. The young delegate swallowed her fear. "The humans warned us about this. 300 years ago they came to us with evidence of the swarm. They begged us to prepare. We laughed at them and sent them away." She paused, gathering her courage. "They knew the swarm was coming before we did. They have had centuries to prepare. And they come from a world of violence and predation. If anyone in this galaxy knows how to fight, it is them." Considered her words. He remembered Ambassador standing in this very chamber, pleading with him to listen. He remembered calling her a liar and ordering her removed. He had been so certain she was wrong. He had been so confident in the Conclave's superiority. Now half the galaxy was dead or dying. "Send a delegation to Sol System," he commanded. "Tell the humans we are willing to discuss terms for their assistance." The delegation departed within hours. They traveled faster than any ship had ever traveled before, pushed by desperation and fear. When they arrived at the edge of human space, they transmitted their request and waited. The response took a full day to arrive. The humans, it seemed, were in no hurry. Finally, a message came through. They were invited to a space station orbiting Earth's moon. They would be received by Admiral, commander of the Terran Defense Force. The delegates docked their ship and walked into the station. They had expected primitive construction, dirty hallways, the crude technology of a species barely capable of leaving their own planet. What they found was something else entirely. The station was enormous, far larger than anything the Conclave had built. Its corridors were clean and efficient, humming with energy. Humans in military uniforms walked past them without a second glance, their faces hard and focused. Everything about this place spoke of discipline and preparation and purpose. Admiral received them in a conference room overlooking Earth. He was an old man now, his hair turned gray and his face lined with years of worry. But his eyes were sharp and clear, missing nothing. The delegates made their case. The swarm was destroying everything. The Conclave was helpless. Only humanity could save them. They offered technology in exchange for assistance. They offered to lift all restrictions on human expansion. They offered money and resources and anything else the humans might want. Listened in silence. When they finished, he did not respond immediately. Instead, he walked to the window and stared down at the blue and green planet below. "Do you know what I find interesting?" he said finally. 300 years ago, you told us we were monsters. You said we were too dangerous to be trusted. You locked us in this system and told us to stay until we destroyed ourselves. He turned to face them. And now you come here, begging for our help because you need monsters. You need the very thing you feared. The lead delegate lowered his head. "We were wrong. We see that now. Please, Admiral, billions have already died. Billions more will follow if you do not help." Studied them for a long moment, then he sighed. "We will help, not because we owe you anything, not because we want your technology or your territory. We will help because the swarm threatens everyone, including us, and we will help because it is the right thing to do." He touched a control panel, and holographic displays flickered to life around the room. They showed ships unlike anything the delegates had ever seen. Massive vessels of angular metal, bristling with weapons and armor. Thousands of them, arranged in perfect formation. "The Terran First Fleet said, 'We have been building this for 300 years, ever since we first detected the swarm. We knew you would not listen. We knew we would have to fight alone, so we prepared.'" The delegates stared at the display in wonder and fear. The human ships looked nothing like the elegant craft of the Conclave. They were ugly and brutal and terrifying. They looked like something designed to kill. "Admiral," the lead delegate whispered, "what are those ships capable of?" Smiled, and there was something in that smile that made the delegates shiver. "You called us dangerous," he said. "You were right. Now let us show you exactly how right you were." The Terran First Fleet arrived at Meridian 7 on a Tuesday morning. The planet was a major colony world, home to 50 million beings from a dozen different species. The swarm had surrounded it 3 days earlier. Their hive ships hung in orbit like hungry predators waiting to feed. On the surface, people looked up at the sky and prayed to whatever gods they believed in. No one expected help to come. Then space itself seemed to tear open, and the human fleet emerged. Council observers watched from a safe distance as the Terran ships took formation. There were 300 of them, each one a monster of metal and weapons. They moved with perfect coordination, spreading out to face the swarm like wolves circling prey. At the center of the formation floated the flagship TSS Defiant. Admiral stood on its bridge, surrounded by screens showing tactical data. He was calm, his hands steady, his voice quiet as he gave orders. "All ships, this is Admiral, weapons free. Show them what can do." The battle began. Human ships launched missiles that the Council observers could not understand. Instead of explosions, the weapons released clouds of something black and terrible. Where the clouds touched swarm vessels, the living ships began to dissolve. Their organic hulls melted like ice in fire, falling apart into chunks of dead flesh. Engineered bacteria, explained to no one in particular. Designed specifically to target biology. We have been developing it for 200 years. The swarm responded with fury. Thousands of smaller creatures launched from the hive ships, swarming toward the human fleet like angry insects. They were fast and numerous and should have overwhelmed any normal defense. But the humans were not normal. Point defense systems activated across the fleet, filling space with walls of fire. Laser cannons swept back and forth, cutting through swarm creatures by the hundreds. Missile after missile launched, each one finding its target with perfect precision. And then the Marines deployed. Council observers watched in disbelief as thousands of small craft launched from the human ships. Each one carried soldiers in powered armor, humans encased in metal shells that made them look more like machines than living beings. They flew directly toward the swarm hive ships. "What are they doing?" one observer asked. "They cannot possibly survive inside those creatures." But the Marines were not trying to survive. They were trying to kill. The armored soldiers cut through the organic hulls of the hive ships like knives through flesh. They moved in teams, covering each other, pushing deeper and deeper into the enemy vessels. Where they met resistance, they fought with weapons that burned and froze and dissolved. Where the corridors were too narrow, they used their bare hands, their powered armor giving them the strength to tear through chitin and bone. The swarm had never experienced anything like this. They had consumed thousands of species across dozens of galaxies. None of them had ever fought back like this. None of them had ever invaded their ships and killed them from the inside. On the ground, things were even more brutal. Terran ground forces had landed in the areas where swarm creatures were thickest. They came with tanks and artillery and weapons the Council had banned ago. Chemical agents that melted organic matter. Nuclear devices that vaporized everything within miles. Engineered plagues that spread through swarm populations like wildfire. A Council military advisor watched the footage with growing horror. "These weapons are forbidden," he said. "The Convention of 12 Stars specifically banned chemical and biological warfare." A human colonel standing nearby shrugged. "We never signed that convention. You would not let us." The advisor stared at her, but the suffering these weapons cause is considerable, the colonel agreed. So is the suffering of 50 million civilians being eaten alive. We have made our choice. You can judge us later if there is a later. The battle lasted 9 hours. When it ended, 3 swarm hive ships drifted dead in orbit, their massive bodies breaking apart as the engineered bacteria continued their work. Thousands of smaller creatures floated in pieces, cut apart by weapons they had never evolved to resist. On the surface, Meridian 7 was but standing. Large areas had been destroyed in the fighting, turned to ash and glass by nuclear fire, but the swarm had been pushed back. The population centers were intact. 50 million people were still alive. It was the first major victory against the in recorded history. Admiral addressed the Council observers via video link. His face was tired, but his eyes still held that sharp focus that had guided the battle. "This was a skirmish," he said. "A test run. The true swarm is still out there, billions strong, spreading across your territory. We can win battles like this, but to win the war we need more than the Terran fleet." "What do you need?" the lead observer asked. His expression hardened. "We need you to become what you have spent 12,000 years trying not to be. We need you to become warriors, killers. We need you to build weapons like ours and use them without hesitation." The observer looked sick. "You are asking us to abandon everything we believe in." "I am asking you to survive," replied. "The swarm does not care about your beliefs. They do not care about your conventions or your treaties or your civilized values. They care about one thing, eating you. If you want to live, you have to care about one thing too, killing them first." He paused. We will teach you. We will show you how to fight like, but you have to be willing to learn. The council met in emergency session. The debate was fierce and painful. Many delegates argued that becoming like the humans would be worse than death. Better to die with honor than become monsters. But the majority disagreed. They had seen the footage from Meridian 7. They had watched human soldiers tear through swarm hive ships with their bare hands. They had seen what weapons could do to creatures that had seemed invincible. The vote passed. The conclave would accept humanity's help. They would learn to fight. And so the transformation began. Human trainers spread across council space, teaching species that had never known violence how to kill. They showed gentle scientists how to design weapons of mass destruction. They taught peaceful farmers how to hold guns and aim at living targets. It was ugly work. Many council species could not handle the psychological strain. Some went mad from the training. Others refused to participate and were evacuated to protected zones where they could wait out the war in peace. But many more stepped up. They discovered something inside themselves that they had forgotten existed, a willingness to fight, a refusal to surrender, a fire that burned in the hearts of all living things when their existence was threatened. Factories that had once produced art and music now produced bullets and bombs. Shipyards that had built trading vessels now built warships based on human designs. Schools that had taught philosophy and poetry now taught tactics and strategy. The conclave was changing, and the swarm was about to learn what that meant. Admiral stood on the bridge of the Defiant, watching data scroll across his screens. Behind him, a combined fleet of human and council ships stretched across light years of space. It was the largest military force in galactic history. His second-in-command approached. "Admiral, the fleet is ready. All ships report battle stations manned." Nodded. "Good. Tell them to remember their training. Tell them to remember why we are fighting." He looked out at the stars, at the darkness where the swarm waited. "Tell them that today we are all." The fleet moved forward into the night. The war lasted 12 years. Historians would later call it the Great Devouring, though those who lived through it had other names for it. Names filled with pain and loss and horror. Names that could not be spoken without tears. Humanity led the fight from the very beginning. Terran ships were always at the front of every battle. Human soldiers died on worlds they had never heard of, fighting for species who had once called them monsters. They asked for nothing in return. They simply fought and bled and died alongside their new allies. The swarm learned to fear them. For the first time in their ancient existence, they encountered prey that did not run. Humans charged toward danger instead of away from it. They survived wounds that should have killed them. They kept fighting even when all hope seemed lost. And they had weapons the swarm could not adapt to. Chemical agents that changed composition every few hours. Engineered diseases that evolved faster than the swarm could develop immunity. Nuclear weapons that burned so hot nothing organic could survive. And worst of all, the humans themselves, soldiers who refused to stop until either they or their enemies were dead. But winning battles was not the same as winning the war. For every swarm hive ship destroyed, 10 more appeared from the darkness between galaxies. For every world saved, 3 more fell. They were not a single invasion force. They were an endless tide, a species that had consumed entire galaxies before and would consume entire galaxies again. The Council lost 12 species in the first year alone, not defeated, not scattered, extinct. Every last member of those races was consumed by the swarm, their worlds reduced to barren rock, their histories erased forever. By the 5th year, the number had risen to 47. High Arbiter watched his civilization die piece by piece. His ancient crystal shell was cracked now, held together by human-engineered patches that glowed with soft blue light. He had survived assassination attempts, battle wounds, and the crushing weight of 12,000 years of certainty collapsing around him. He had been so sure the conclave was perfect, so confident that peace and diplomacy could solve any problem. Now he stood in a chamber that held barely 100 delegates instead of thousands. The empty platforms floated in silence, monuments to the species that would never return. But there was hope. There was always hope as long as the humans kept fighting. Admiral had died in the 7th year, his flagship destroyed protecting a refugee convoy. His son had taken command after him, and when the sun fell, his daughter stepped up. The family had lost 37 members to the war. They kept producing more. Now it was Captain who commanded the Terran fleet. He was young, barely 30 years old, with eyes that had seen too much death and hands that had shed too much blood. He carried the weight of 2 generations on his shoulders. And he carried something else, something secret. In the deepest vaults of human space, scientists had been working on a final weapon since the war began. They called it the erasure device, though its official designation was far more clinical. It was humanity's darkest creation, a machine that could unravel the very fabric of reality itself. No one wanted to use it. No one even wanted to admit it existed. But the war was reaching its final stage, and desperate times required desperate measures. Human scouts had finally located the source of the swarm. Deep in the void between galaxies, hidden in a fold of twisted spacetime, something vast and terrible waited. The Queen Entity, the mother of all, a creature that existed across 17 dimensions at once, spawning endless armies of her children to consume the universe. Kill her and the swarm would die. The shared consciousness that bound them together would shatter. Without their queen to guide them, they would turn on each other, their coordinated intelligence reduced to animal instinct. But getting to her would require sacrifice on a scale never before imagined. Stood before the combined fleet, over 10,000 ships from hundreds of species. His voice echoed through every bridge and command center across the Armada. "I will not lie to you," he said. "The mission ahead has a very low probability of success. Many of us will not come back. Some species may lose every ship they have sent. We are asking you to risk extinction for the chance to save everyone else." He paused. "If any ship wishes to withdraw, now is the time. There will be no shame in leaving. You have all fought with incredible courage. No one can ask more of you." Silence filled the comm channels. Not a single ship moved. A voice came through from a council vessel. It was cracked and old, speaking a language that only a few thousand beings still understood. "Captain," the voice said, "my species has 700 survivors. We have one ship. If we die today, our race dies with us." The channel hummed with static. "We are not leaving. We have learned something from your people over these 12 years. We have learned that some things are worth dying for. Victory is one of them." Felt tears in his eyes. He blinked them away. "Then let us go together," he said, "one final time." The fleet jumped. The battle in the void lasted for 3 days. Swarm defenders threw themselves at the invaders in numbers beyond counting. Ships died by the thousands, torn apart by creatures the size of small moons. Species that had survived the entire war were wiped out in minutes, their final transmissions lost in the chaos of combat. But the fleet pushed forward. Humans and council species fighting side by side, dying side by side, refusing to stop until they reached the Queen. Ship was the first to break through. The Defiant, battered and burning, tumbled through the dimensional barrier that protected the Queen Entity. What waited on the other side? Description: a creature of impossible size, stretching across realities like a cancer spreading through flesh. "Target acquired," announced. His voice was calm, arming the erasure device. Around him, his crew prepared for the end. They knew what activating the weapon would mean. The energy required would consume the Defiant completely. There would be no escape. A comm signal came through. It was from the Council flagship carrying High Arbiter himself. "Captain," the ancient being said, "wait, there must be another way. Your species has done enough. Let someone else." "With respect," High Arbiter interrupted, "this is what we do. This is what we have always done. We fight the monsters that others cannot face. We pay the prices that others cannot pay." He looked at his crew, at the humans who had served beside him through years of horror, at the faces of friends and family who would never see home again. "It has been an honor," he said. He pressed the button. Reality screamed. The Queen Entity had existed for billions of years. She had consumed galaxies beyond number. She had believed herself immortal, eternal, beyond the reach of any weapon ever created. She was wrong. The erasure device tore through her like fire through paper. It unraveled her existence across all 17 dimensions at once, erasing her not just from the present, but from the very fabric of spacetime. She died screaming in frequencies that shattered stars and broke the minds of every swarm creature linked to her consciousness. Across the galaxy, billions of suddenly lost their guiding intelligence. The shared mind that had coordinated them for eons went silent. They turned on each other with mindless fury, tearing apart their own hive ships, consuming their own bodies in confusion and rage. Within hours, the swarm was destroying itself. Within days, it was over. The war was won. But the cost, the terrible, terrible cost. 12 species had gone extinct. 112 more were reduced to scattered handfuls of survivors. They're destroyed, their cultures shattered beyond recovery. The gentle civilization that had existed before the war was gone forever, replaced by something harder and darker and more dangerous. And humanity had paid more than anyone. 3 billion humans had died in the fighting. Entire colony worlds had been sacrificed to slow the swarm's advance. The family, which had led the war from beginning to end, had no members left, had been the last. On Prime, in the ruins of the Great Chamber, a ceremony was held. High Arbiter stood before the surviving delegates, his cracked shell barely holding together. Across from him stood the new human ambassador, a woman named Simply. She was a distant descendant of the first ambassador, though the family tree had become complicated over 3 centuries of war and loss. Wore the scars of a dozen battlefields. One eye was replaced with a mechanical implant. Half her face was covered in burned tissue that had never fully healed. She looked nothing like the gentle captain who had first come to this chamber asking for friendship. "We were wrong," said. His voice was barely a whisper. "We should have listened. We should have welcomed you." Looked at him for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice held no triumph, only exhaustion and grief. "Yes, you should have. Not because we could have stopped the war. Nothing could have stopped them, but because we could have prepared together. We could have saved billions who died in those first terrible years." She turned to look out the viewport at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, the remains of the swarm were still dying, tearing themselves apart without their queen to guide them. "You called us monsters because we came from a world that taught us to survive. You were so afraid of what we might do to you that you never considered what we might do for you." Lowered his ancient head. "What can we do now? How can we ever make this right?" Was quiet for a long time. Finally she spoke. "You cannot make it right. The dead are dead. The extinct are gone. Nothing will bring them back." She turned to face the chamber, looking at the survivors of 100 species who had learned to fight like. "But you can remember. Remember this war. Remember the price we all paid. And remember that the next time someone comes to you with a warning, the next time a species you consider lesser tries to tell you something important, you listen." The new Galactic Council, humanity's membership unanimously. They took their place among the stars, not as conquerors but as protectors. And across the rebuilt conclave, a new saying took hold. Parents taught it to their children. Teachers wrote it in school books. Leaders repeated it before every session. Never ignore a warning. They know what hunts in the dark. The end.